I sent the text from the bathroom floor of the bridal suite, sitting on marble that cost more than my father's whole bakery. 3 words, no punctuation, no context, just the rawest, most desperate thing I've ever typed, with shaking hands in a wedding dress I didn't choose, for a wedding I didn't want, to a man I had no right to call. Come get me, Rinker. And then, because I am a woman who has spent her whole life being polite even when the world is eating her alive, I added a 4th word, please. I didn't know if he'd see it. I didn't know if he'd come. I didn't know if a man like Dante Moretti, the name this city says carefully, the name that makes rooms go quiet, even remembered the fat baker who'd made his dying mother's last birthday cake 8 months ago and cried in the kitchen afterward because his mother had held my hand and told me I had beautiful hands. But I knew this. In 45 minutes, I was going to walk down an aisle and marry a man named Victor Hale, and Victor Hale was going to own me the way he owned buildings and companies and people, completely, legally, and forever. And I knew something else that nobody in this building except me and Victor knew. The debt that was buying my body at that altar was a lie. A manufactured number, a trap built by a man who wanted the baker's daughter and found a way to make her father owe him enough to hand her over. And I was out of doors, out of options, out of everything except 3 words and a phone number I'd kept in my contacts for 8 months, labeled only DM, because even saving his name felt like a presumption a woman like me wasn't allowed to make about a man like him. Come get me, please send. I put the phone face down on the marble. I put my forehead on my knees, and I waited for either a miracle or a wedding march, whichever came first. I should tell you how I ended up on that floor, but the truth is, it started long before the dress. My name is Rosie Carver. I'm 30 years old. I'm a big woman. And until 6 months ago, I was the best baker you've never heard of, the one who made the wedding cakes for every family in this city that had money and taste, the one whose hands could turn sugar and butter into something that made grown men cry at their own receptions. Carver and Daughter, the little shop on Bellman Street. My father's name on the sign, my hands in the kitchen, that was the deal, and it was a good deal, and I was proud of it. Victor Hale walked into my bakery on a Tuesday, silver temples, jaw like a photograph, the kind of handsome that's more like a weapon than a gift, precise, maintained, deployed. He wanted a cake for a charity gala. He was charming. He was specific. He came back 3 times to check on the design, and each time he stayed longer, and each time he looked at me a little more carefully, the way a man looks at something he's decided to acquire. I was flattered. God help me, I was flattered. A man who looked like that, looking at me, the big girl behind the flour-dusted counter? Nobody looks at me like that. Nobody has ever looked at me like that. You have extraordinary hands, Victor said, watching me pipe a border. Has anyone ever told you that? Someone had, actually, once, 8 months before. But I'll get to her. The flattery lasted 3 weeks. Then Victor stopped being charming and started being honest, which is always worse. My father owed money. I knew that. The bakery had been struggling. Everyone's bakery was struggling, and Dad had taken loans, and the loans had terms, and the terms had teeth. What I didn't know, not then, was that the loans had been quietly acquired, bought up, consolidated into a single debt held by a single man, Victor Hale. He told my father over dinner at a restaurant my father couldn't afford to enter. I know because my father came home gray and shaking and sat at the kitchen table and couldn't look at me. He says he'll forgive the debt, Dad said, staring at his hands. All of it. The bakery, the second mortgage, everything. In exchange for what? My father's hands shook. You. Not the word Victor used, of course. Victor used words like arrangement and partnership and mutual benefit. But the math was simple. Marry me, and the debt disappears. Refuse, and the bakery closes, and the house goes, and my father, 63, tired, a man who'd never been strong and had gotten so much weaker since Mom died, loses everything he'd spent his life flower dusting into existence. "You don't have to," Dad said. And he meant it. And it broke my heart that he meant it, because I could see in his face that he knew what my answer would be, and he hated himself for needing it, and I hated Victor Hale for building a trap so clean that saying yes felt like love and saying no felt like murder. "I'll do it," I said. "If that answer makes you angry, if you want to shake me and say nobody should have to sell themselves for a debt, I need you to stay for the whole thing. Subscribe now. Because Rosie Carver's story isn't a story about a girl who stayed sold. The engagement lasted 4 months, long enough for me to learn what Victor Hale actually was. He never hit me. I want to say that first, because people always ask, and the answer matters because it shows you how smart the cage was. Victor Hale didn't need to hit. He had something worse, the absolute certainty that he owned you, delivered with a smile so polished you could see your own diminished reflection in it. "Rosie, sweetheart." This was his voice when we were alone. Warm, patient, the voice you'd use with a pet that's confused about the rules. "I've laid out something for you to wear tonight. The blue one. I had it altered. The fit is better now." Altered meant taken in. Every dress he bought me was taken in, not because it didn't fit, but because he wanted me to feel the fabric pulling, to know that even my clothes were a negotiation I was losing. "You're not wearing that to the Hadley dinner." Victor, adjusting his cufflinks, not looking at me. "I don't tell you what to think, Rosie. I just suggest what to show. And the worst one, the one I carry like a stone. We were at a party, his people, and a woman complimented my dress, and Victor put his arm around me and said, with a laugh that the room was supposed to share, I keep telling her, if she'd just lose the bakery weight, she wouldn't need me to dress her. But that's what I'm here for, aren't I? The upgrade." The room laughed. I smiled. Because the smile was the debt, and the debt was my father's house, and my father's house was the only thing standing between him and a very specific kind of ruin. I was practicing a smile the way I used to practice piping, technically perfect, emotionally dead. 8 months before the bathroom floor, before Victor, before the debt became a leash, I made a cake. It was a commission, small, private. A birthday cake for a woman named Elena Moretti, who was 81 years old and living in a private care suite at St. Catherine's, and who, her son's assistant told me on the phone, wanted nothing elaborate, just a lemon cake with ti voglio bene, mama written in real buttercream, not fondant, because fondant is for people who don't know the difference, and Elena Moretti knew the difference. I made the cake, I drove it over myself, because it was small enough to carry, and I was curious about the kind of woman who specified buttercream over fondant at 81. Elena Moretti was tiny and bright-eyed, and dying the way some people die, slowly, with their wits and their standards intact. She watched me set the cake down, and she took my hand, just reached out and took it, and said, in an accent that tasted like the old country, "You have the hands of someone who makes things for love, not for money. I can always tell. My mother had the same hands." I cried, right there, in front of a dying woman and a room full of flowers. I cried because no one had ever said anything that kind and that true to me, and because my hands were the one thing I was proud of, and she had seen them. And standing in the doorway, watching me cry over a lemon cake while his mother held my hand, was her son. Dante Moretti, 35. Dark hair, dark eyes, the kind of jaw that belongs on a coin. Built like a man who was raised on real food and hard decisions. He was the city's Dante, the name that made rooms mind their manners, the man whose family moved things and settled things that never reached a courthouse. And he stood in that doorway, and he didn't say a word, and I didn't know he was watching, and when I looked up, mortified, wiping my face with a flour-dusted sleeve, he just nodded. Small, the way a man nods when he's seen something real. His mother died 11 days later. His assistant called to tell me, not to order another cake, just to tell me, because Elena had asked her to. She wanted the girl with the beautiful hands to know. I baked a lemon cake that night, alone, in my kitchen, for no one, because some things you just do with your hands when your heart can't hold them. Dante Moretti sent me a note 3 days after the funeral, handwritten, heavy paper. It said, "Thank you for the cake, and for crying over it. My mother said you were the most honest person in the room, and my mother was never wrong about people. DM." I kept the note. I kept his number from the assistant's call, and I told myself that was all it was, a kind woman, a good cake, a note from a world I'd never touch. I was wrong about the never. 6 weeks before the wedding, I found the ledger. Not a literal ledger, a digital trail. I was in the bakery after hours, looking for Dad's old insurance paperwork, and I opened the wrong folder on his laptop. Financial records I'd never seen, invoices for supplies we never ordered, payments to companies I'd never heard of, routed through Carver and daughter like water through a pipe. I sat in that desk chair, in my father's bakery, and I did the math the way a baker does math, carefully, precisely, to the gram, and the math said something that made the floor tilt. The debt was manufactured. Not all of it. The bakery really was struggling. But the crushing number, the one that made marriage the only exit, that number was inflated by Victor Hale's own money moving through accounts he'd set up in my father's name. Ghost invoices, phantom supply orders, money flowing in and out to create the appearance of a debt my father couldn't pay, when the real debt was less than 1/3 of what Victor claimed. I screenshotted every page, every terminal stamp, every ghost invoice, every phantom supply order. My phone became the only copy of the truth. My father didn't owe Victor Hale his daughter. My father owed Victor Hale a bad quarter and some overdue rent. Victor had taken a stumble and built it into a cliff, and then he'd stood at the bottom and offered to catch me. I sat there until the bakery light turned the papers blue with dawn, and I understood 2 things. 1, I couldn't tell my father. The discovery would destroy him, not the money, but the knowledge that he'd been used, that the sacrifice he'd asked of his daughter was based on a number a man had invented. It would break him in a place that doesn't heal. 2, I couldn't confront Victor, a man who builds a trap that elaborate doesn't leave the door unlocked. If I showed him what I knew, the real paperwork would vanish, and I'd be the hysterical bride making accusations about numbers she didn't understand, and the wedding would happen anyway, except now I'd be married to a man who knew I'd tried to run. I was trapped. Worse than trapped, I was trapped with the knowledge that I was trapped, and no one to tell. Almost no one. The wedding morning was beautiful. That was the cruelest part. White roses, crystal, a tent on the grounds of Victor's estate that could hold 300 and did. My dress was stunning. Victor had chosen it, of course, the way Victor chose everything, and the woman in the mirror was a woman I almost didn't recognize. Hair up, makeup perfect, a veil so fine it looked like mist. Beautiful, expensive, a product, packaged for delivery. My father came to see me in the bridal suite. He stood in the doorway in his rented suit, and he looked at me, and his eyes filled, and he said, "You look like your mother." I almost broke. I almost told him everything. The ledger, the ghost invoices, the manufactured cliff. But I looked at his face, at the proud, tired, grateful way he was looking at me, grateful that his daughter's sacrifice was saving his life's work, and I could not take that from him. Not today, not yet. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, Rosie girl." He left. The door closed. And the handlers arrived, Victor's people. 2 women in matching dresses who weren't bridesmaids. I didn't have bridesmaids, because Victor had explained that my friends weren't appropriate for the guest list, and who were there to make sure the product was delivered to the altar on schedule. 20 minutes, Mrs. Hale, one of them said, and the name, Mrs. Hale, already, before the vows, like the sale was already final, hit me like a slap. I went to the bathroom. I locked the door. I sat on the marble floor in my beautiful dress, and I took out my phone. One contact. DM. 8 months of silence. One note, one cake, one dying woman's hand on mine. I typed the 3 words before I could talk myself out of them. Come get me. And then, because I am pathologically polite even while my life is ending, please, 14 minutes. That's how long it took. I didn't know then that he'd been at a meeting on the east side of the city, 11 minutes from Victor's estate. The distance matters, because without it, 14 minutes sounds like a fairy tale. It wasn't. It was geography, and a man who drove like the answer mattered. I know because I watched the minutes on my phone, the way a woman watches a clock in a hospital waiting room, each one a year, each one the distance between a life and the absence of one. At minute 7, the phone buzzed. Where? One word, no question mark, not "Are you okay?" or "What's happening?" or "Is this real?" Just where. I typed the address, the estate, the bridal suite. 2nd floor, at minute 11, coming, don't move. At minute 14, there was a sound downstairs that I felt more than heard. A change in the air, the way a room changes when someone walks into it who doesn't ask permission to be there. And then footsteps on the stairs, and then a knock on the bridal suite door, and then a voice I hadn't heard in 8 months, low and even and absolutely certain. Rosie, it's Dante. Open the door. I opened it. He was standing in the hallway of Victor Hale's estate in a suit that cost what my bakery made in a month, and his face was calm the way the surface of deep water is calm, and he looked at me, in the dress, in the veil, in the makeup, with my eyes red and my hands shaking, and he said, "You called. I'm here, tell me." And I told him, all of it. The debt, the ledger, the ghost invoices, the manufactured cliff, the cage dressed as a marriage. I told him standing in a hallway in a wedding dress, with 300 guests waiting downstairs, and a man who thought he owned me checking his watch at the altar, and Dante Moretti listened the way his mother had listened, completely, without interrupting, the way you listen to something that matters. When I finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "Do you have the records?" "On my phone. Screenshots. Everything." "Show me." I showed him. He looked at the numbers the way I'd looked at them, carefully, to the gram. A man who reads money the way I read flour, and when he looked up, his eyes had changed. Not angry, worse than angry, decided. "This wedding is not happening," he said. "Not today. Not any day. Dante, he owns my father's. He owns a number he invented." Dante's voice dropped. "I've seen men like this before. I've handled men like this before. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, because what I'm about to do cannot be undone." He looked at me. Not at the dress, not at the body Victor wanted altered. At me. "Do you want to leave?" "Yes. Even if it's hard, even if your father doesn't understand at first, even if the world calls you the bride who ran." "Yes." "Then I'll make you a deal," Dante said. "Not his kind. Mine. I will walk down those stairs, and I will end this. I will take on the real debt, the actual number, not the fiction, and your father will owe me, and I will forgive it, because your mother's lemon cake was the last thing that made my mother smile, and that is a debt I owe you. But I need you to understand, the man down there will not let this go quietly, and when he pushes back, I will push harder, and my world is not a kind one. I know what your world is. Do you?" "Your mother told me," I said. "She said you were the most dangerous man she'd ever loved, and that she'd spent her whole life hoping someone would see the man underneath the dangerous, and she said she never found anyone honest enough." Dante went still, the specific stillness of a man who has just been handed something he wasn't expecting. "My mother talked too much," he said, but his voice was different. "Your mother was right about everything, I said. She was right about my hands. She was right about you. He walked me down those stairs and into the wedding. Not up the aisle. Through it, past 300 guests who turned like flowers following a new sun, past the string quartet that stopped mid-note, past the white roses and the crystal and the beautiful lie of it all, straight to the altar where Victor Hale was standing, with a smile that was already starting to curdle. "Mr. Hale," Dante said, and his voice carried across the tent the way a stone carries across still water. "I understand you're owed a debt by the Carver family." Victor's smile held, barely. "This is a private ceremony, Mr. Moretti. I don't recall sending an invitation." "You didn't. I'm not here for the ceremony. I'm here for the debt." Dante reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. "I've acquired the Carver obligation, all of it, as of 20 minutes ago. The bakery loan, the second mortgage, the supply invoices, every number. Which means the arrangement that brought this woman to your altar no longer applies." He set the document on the altar. "She's not yours to marry, Mr. Hale. She never was. You just held the receipt." The room went silent. 300 people, and not a breath. Victor's smile died. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I just did. That debt is mine," she agreed. "She agreed to a number you manufactured." Dante's voice dropped to a register that made the front row lean back. "I've seen the terminal stamps, Mr. Hale. The ghost invoices, the supply orders for product that was never delivered. You didn't collect a debt. You built a cage and put a woman in it, and you called it a marriage." He held Victor's eyes. "In my world, we have a word for that. And we have a response to it. Would you like to hear either one?" Victor Hale looked at Dante Moretti, and Victor Hale, for the first time since I'd known him, had nothing to say. "The debt is settled," Dante said. "The wedding is cancelled. And if you contact Ms. Carver, her father, or anyone associated with that bakery, ever again, you will be hearing from me in a way that doesn't involve paperwork." He turned to the room. "I apologize for the interruption. The reception is paid for. Enjoy the cake." Now, right there, in that moment, this is where I need you to answer. If you were standing in a wedding dress in front of 300 strangers, with the cage torn open and 2 doors in front of you, which one do you walk through? His deal: step into the Don's world, trust a man whose dying mother said he was dangerous but worth deserving, let yourself be known by someone whose power could protect you or become the next cage. Or her door, walk out alone, carry the real debt on your own shoulders, rebuild the bakery with your own flour-dusted hands, and never let another man hold the receipt, ever. Drop your answer in the comments, his deal or her door, and tell me why. I'll tell you what Rosie chose. We made it 10 steps past the tent before Victor caught us. Not us, me. His hand closed on my arm, not gently, not the way you hold something you care about, but the way you hold something you've paid for and someone is trying to take. And he pulled me around to face him, and the mask was gone. The charm, the smile, the careful performance, gone. What was underneath was a man who had built a trap out of numbers and patience and was watching it walk away. "You don't get to do this," Victor said. Not to Dante, to me. Looking at me the way he always looked at me when we were alone, the way you look at something you own that's malfunctioning. I made this. I made the dress. I made the guest list. I made the deal that saved your father's pathetic little bakery. You are mine, Rosie. Not because of a debt. Because you were always going to end up belonging to someone, and I decided it would be me. His hand tightened on my arm. You think this man is saving you? Victor laughed. The real laugh, the one without any warmth in it at all. He's not saving you. He's buying you. Different price, same product. Look at you. You really think a man like that, he jerked his chin at Dante, came here because he cares about the flower girl? He came because it's a power move. You're a transaction, sweetheart. You always were. The only question is whose receipt you're on. I stood there in my wedding dress with his hand on my arm and his words in my ears, and for one terrible second, I almost believed him. Because Victor Hale had spent 4 months teaching me that the worst things are true, and this, you're a transaction, you always were, was the thesis statement of his entire curriculum. And then Dante Moretti's hand, not on Victor, not violent, not even fast, simply closed over Victor's wrist, gently, the way you'd remove a child's hand from something fragile. And Dante said, quiet, with a patience that was more frightening than any shout, "Take your hand off her. This is the only time I'll ask with words." Victor let go. "You think you can just—" "Mr. Hale." Dante stepped between us. Not dramatically, just there. A wall that wasn't there a second ago and was now the most immovable thing in the garden. "I've settled the debt. The legal transfer is filed. There is no arrangement, there is no wedding, and there is no version of the next 10 seconds where your hand touches her again." He turned his head, just slightly, to his 2 men. They hadn't moved. They didn't need to. "Here is what happens now," Dante continued. "You go back inside. You tell your 300 guests whatever story preserves your pride, and tomorrow morning you wake up in a world where the Carver family owes you nothing, and Rosie Carver is a woman you used to know. That is the generous version. And the other version? The other version involves those ghost invoices becoming very public, and the word fraud following your name into every boardroom and bank and courtroom in this city for the rest of your natural life." Dante straightened his cuffs. "I keep receipts too, Mr. Hale. Mine are just harder to lose." Victor Hale looked at Dante Moretti, and I watched, from behind the wall of a man who'd driven 14 minutes to a wedding he wasn't invited to, because a woman in a flour-dusted apron typed 3 words on a bathroom floor. I watched Victor do the math. The particular math of a man who builds traps and has just realized he's in one. He turned. He walked back into the tent. He didn't look at me again. I stood in the garden in my wedding dress, free for the first time in 6 months, and I started to shake. Dante didn't touch me. He just stood there, a step away, and held out a handkerchief, like a man who understands that a woman who's just been freed from one cage doesn't want to be immediately gathered into anything else. "I need to tell you something," he said, "before you decide what happens next." I took the handkerchief, wiped my eyes. "Tell me." "My mother was dying when you brought that cake. She'd stopped eating, stopped talking to most people. She held your hand and said you had beautiful hands, and she made me promise." He stopped, swallowed. "The most dangerous man in the city, swallowing around a word. She made me promise I'd look after the girl with the honest hands." Her words. She said you were the most real person who'd walked into that room in a year, and that I should find a way to deserve knowing you. Dante. I kept tabs. That's the truth, and I won't dress it up. When I heard about the engagement, when I heard who, I had someone look into the numbers, because men like Victor Hale don't marry women like you unless they're acquiring something they can't buy clean. He met my eyes. "I've had the ghost invoice evidence for 3 weeks. I was building the case to take to your father. I was trying to do it properly, without scaring you, without walking into your life like I owned it. Then I texted. Then you texted." A pause. 3 words, and I was in a car before I finished reading them. "I want to be honest with you about what that means. I didn't come because of a deal, or a power move, or because my mother asked me to. I came because a woman I haven't stopped thinking about for 8 months asked me for help, and the thought of her marrying that man was—" He stopped, set his jaw. "I came because I wanted to, and wanting to is more dangerous than any deal, and you should know that before you decide what's next." I had to tell my father. That was the hardest part, harder than Victor's hand, harder than the bathroom floor, harder than any of it. Because my father was a good man who'd been played by a smarter one, and the knowledge that the sacrifice he'd asked of his daughter was based on a manufactured number was going to break something in him that flour and sugar couldn't fix. I told him that night. At the kitchen table, in the bakery, with the same hands that had piped every wedding cake in this city, I showed him the screenshots on my phone. Every ghost invoice, every terminal stamp, the same evidence I'd shown Dante in that hallway. My father cried, not the quiet kind. The kind that comes from a man who suddenly understands that the worst thing he ever did was hand his daughter to a monster, and that the monster designed the situation specifically so he would. I should have known, he said. I should have. Dad. I took his hands. But you couldn't have known. He built it so you couldn't. And I said yes because I love you, and I'd say it again, and the only thing that changed is that someone with better eyes looked at the numbers. The Moretti man? Yes. What does he want? And this is the question, isn't it? The question Victor asked, the question my father asked, the question you're asking right now. What does he want? He wants the debt forgiven, I said, and he wants to know me, and I told him both of those things are going to be on my terms. He came to the bakery the next day. Not the estate, not a restaurant, not anywhere that belonged to his world, my counter, my flour, my terms. If you mean what you said, I told him, then here's how it goes. The debt is forgiven, and I don't owe you a replacement. Not a marriage, not a date, not a smile, nothing. I am not the next line on the receipt. Agreed. I keep the bakery. It's mine. My father's name on the sign. My hands in the kitchen. You don't invest. You don't improve. You don't help. If the bakery survives, it survives on flour and butter and 5 a.m. alarms, the way it always has. Agreed. And if you want to know me, the way you said, the way your mother asked you to, then you come here, to the bakery, in the daylight. You sit at that table. I pointed at the small table by the window, the one where my mother used to sit, and you eat what I make, and you talk to me like a person who is choosing to be here, not a man collecting on a debt. Slow, in the open. And the day you treat me like something you bought at a wedding, we're done. Dante Moretti, who had faced down Victor Hale in front of 300 people without blinking, looked at me across a flour-dusted counter in a bakery that smelled like lemon and butter, and the corner of his mouth did something I'd never seen it do. It went soft. Those are hard terms, he said. They're the only ones I've got. Good, he said. I've been surrounded by easy my whole life. He reached into his pocket and set something on the counter between us. His phone. Screen up. My text was still on it. 3 words and a please. 8 months of silence answered in 14 minutes. I kept this, he said, because 3 words from a flour-dusted phone were the most honest thing anyone's ever asked me for. And he does. He comes to the bakery, in the daylight. He sits at my mother's table by the window, and he eats what I make, and he doesn't once tell me to change the recipe. He asks me about the flour and the butter and the 5 a.m. alarms, and he listens the way his mother listened, completely, like the answer matters. He has not once treated me like a transaction, he asks. He's learning how, and he's slow at it, and watching the most dangerous man in the city be slow and careful and uncertain with a woman in a flour-dusted apron, a woman the world tried to sell, and she refused to stay sold. That, it turns out, is the only kind of being known I ever wanted. My father is fine, the bakery is fine, the debt is dust. And the 3-word text, "Come get me please," sits in both our phones, unsent and answered, the smallest message and the heaviest thing we own. Because 3 words from a bathroom floor brought a man 14 minutes to a wedding he wasn't invited to, and a woman's hands, the same hands his mother said were built for love, made a cake that started everything. I won't tell you it's simple. He is what he is. His world is what it is. There are nights I stand in my own kitchen and wonder what I've walked toward. But I know this. I was the girl on the bathroom floor. The girl in the dress she didn't choose, at the altar she didn't want, with a number around her neck that a man had invented. And I sent 3 words to the one person in the world who'd seen my hands and not my weight, my work and not my price tag, and he came. And then I had the harder courage to refuse to be owned a second time, even by the man who'd saved me from the first. They tried to sell Rosie Carver at the altar. She sent 3 words from the bathroom floor, and the man who came didn't buy her. He just tore up the receipt. If you were me, freed at the altar, terms set, the most dangerous man in the city, eating lemon cake at your mother's table, would you let him stay? Would you take his deal? Or would you keep her door, your bakery, your flour, your 5 a.m. alarms, and build your life with the same hands that started all of this? Drop it in the comments, his deal or her door, and tell me why you'd choose it. I'll pin the one that hits hardest, and if you've ever been the girl on the bathroom floor, the one who typed 3 words to the one person she had no right to call, hear this. Asking for help is not weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing your hands will ever do. And sometimes the right person is 14 minutes away, waiting for you to ask. Now, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button, turn on the bell, because next week's story, she didn't text him, she baked him a message, and the Mafia boss decoded it from the frosting. You don't want to miss what happened next. Before you go, if Rosie's story warmed you, there's a hype button right below this video. Tap it. 3 free points every week. It's one small deposit, like sliding a lemon cake across the counter. Small, quiet, and it makes all the difference to the person who finds it.